The greatest Bleach episode to date. The fire was quite literally fire, and I've never fanboyed this hard at an episode. Since reading the 1000-Year Blood War, I've anticipated seeing this fight in the corresponding chapters finally animated, and it exceeded all the expectations I previously had. Yamamoto solidifies himself as the bastion of Soul Society, and unlike most anime tropes, he doesn't hold back when fighting his opponent. I loved seeing the carnal and visceral wrath emanating from his presence as he reminds Yuha that nothing can compare to the pain and loss from the Shinigami whose light he snuffed out. With the episode opening with Uryu reading through a book regarding the history of the Quincy, we immediately knew what would be transpiring in this episode as we see Yamamoto 1000 years ago with flames surrounding his entire body. Rather than looking like the hero of Soul Society, he instead looks like the villain of our story. The trope of traditional good and evil is ironic within Bleach because our heroes both in ability and form don't appear as good. Specifically within Yamamoto, his aura, his demeanor, his form. He appears as the final boss of hell standing before Yuha, who comes across as an angel of sorts. One of my favorite moments this episode was watching with every step Yamamoto took being coated in flames. This subtle visual adds so much hype to every movement Yamamoto makes, with him continually embodying the aura of fire. His entire essence emanates with such an unrivaled power that every single person in Soul Society can feel him. This prompts the statement from Robert that Yamamoto will lose, and that knowing their leader is fighting doesn't just emblazon the Shinigami, but as well the Quincy. However, Shunzui's reply that those conventions don't apply to Old Man Yamamoto is such a badass answer. Yamamoto isn't like the rest of them, Yamamoto is in a class of his own. Shunzui views Yamamoto as a father of sorts, and so when he speaks on Yamamoto, he speaks with so much reverence and faith in his ability. Time and time again, Yamamoto instills within his people, his captains, that as long as he is there, everything will be okay. This poignant notion of how highly everyone views Yamamoto, it makes the latter part of this episode all the more emotional. However, let's not worry about that now because there are far more hype things to discuss first. If you thought that Bankais have one form and ability, this episode is a slap in the damn face to that notion. Yamamoto finally shows us his Bankai with not just one form, but 4, and holy hell, the hype surrounding his Bankai is unreal. I remember reading through the manga and I was always questioning what could Yamamoto's Bankai be, and I sure as hell didn't expect 4 different forms. Zanka no Tachi is my favorite of all Bankai of the series because of its insane versatility and the abilities being fitting for a king of hell. If you've watched my videos before, you know I'm a sucker for anything that comes across as hellish or demonic, and Yamamoto fits this to a T. The first of his Bankai we see is Zanka no Tachi East, which condenses all of his flames into the tip of his sword. And with the unleash of this ability, it was wild to see the dark atmosphere and flames dissipate momentarily and the air grow increasingly arid and dry. I loved seeing when this occurred that Unohana says that Old Man Yamamoto better end this soon before he destroys everything. And his Zanka no Tachi East does just that. Rather than burning or emitting flames, it eradicates everything it touches to nothingness. This ability in the purest sense is what intense heat and flame does. It destroys everything indiscriminately. It's flame and heat in its purest form, unbridled destructive force. The next Zanka no Tachi we see is West, and I've always been on the fence of whether I like South or West more while reading the manga, but while watching the anime's adaptation, I think my answer is solidified. West has to be my favorite of the Zanka no Tachis. Yamamoto's Zanka no Tachi West coats his body in a temperature the same heat as the center of the sun within 15 million degrees Celsius. When Yamamoto walks, the ground literally melts around him due to the sheer heat, and with heat that intense, you typically can't see it, so the flames that coat him in an armor aren't indicative of the heat his body is coated with. Rather, his spirit energy in this form is so powerful that it emanates from his body in the form of flames. Imagine pulling up to battle with an aura the heat of the sun. It's unreal. During this battle, we continually get flashbacks between Yamamoto in his current form and his form he fought Yuha with 1000 years ago. I love fights that parallel historical ones because through these scenes we can see the further backstory of this mysterious battle that engulfed Soul Society long ago. It reminds me honestly of the Obito and Kakashi fight where it switches between them as children in the current day. It adds so much emotional weight to the fight because there's so much buildup and history surrounding their battle. Yamamoto throughout this fight holds nothing back, and through his words he continually re-emphasizes that the man he was 1000 years ago wasn't him at his peak. That instead his peak is now. His Bankai, his spirit energy, his fighting prowess, they've evolved and made him the god-tier individual that faces Yuha Bak now. Yuha's face throughout this fight is one of shock and uncertainty, which in retrospect is a subtle indication of this Yuha not being the real Yuha, which we'll get to later. Next on the list of all the Zanka no Tachis, we have Zanka no Tachi South, which is absolutely horrifying. With this ability, he calls upon the dead he's killed to come fight on his behalf, but there's an even more terrifying element. He can call upon specific corpses, and in this case he calls upon dead Quincy who once served Yuha. The psychological fighting style forces Yuha to stare face to face with those who served him loyally, who now as corpses fight and claw at him on behalf of Yamamoto. The very notion of someone being able to summon all the dead he's killed over 1,000 years is an incredible concept, and Yamamoto's words attached to it make it all the more alluring. Lifeless bodies, ashes of those who have perished by my flame, lend me your aid, I will grant you the brief pleasure of battle once more. Yamamoto is a man of few words, but everything he says this episode strikes down to the very core of my Yamamoto fanboy. The final Zonka no Tachi is of course North, and it's much simpler than the others and far more short-lived. With Zonka no Tachi North, Yamamoto brings flames around his blade and slashes at Yuha to cut him in half. This ability is super long range and doesn't require the direct contact to hit like East did. I loved that before Yamamoto did his final attack, that we get to see a flashback to Sasakibe, and it enforces the notion that Yamamoto is grieving throughout this battle. He's angry, he's lost those he cares about, and now he's faced with the man who's responsible. This fight was the culmination of his emotional weight he's carried, and with Yuha seemingly defeated, rain begins to pour, and this is when the episode takes quite the turn. As Yuha lays on the ground, he apologizes for losing, which Yama quickly questions. At the end of the day, Yuha started this war and he's their leader. Who would there be to apologize to other than himself? And in terrifying fashion with the perfect soundtrack coupled, the real Yuha appears behind Yamamoto and with a much different aura. Yuha throughout the fight seemed shook while fighting Yamamoto, but this Yuha that appears before us now is anything but. His arrival felt like Madara pulling up to the Great Shinobi War and decimating the Ninja Alliance army. Yuha is without fear and as smug as the man we met within the first episode of this arc, and this distinct personality change makes retrospectively this fight make all the more sense. After all, this Yuha imposter seemed genuinely scared to fight Yamamoto, and that doesn't make sense for the god of Quincy. Sternritter Y, his ability within the Shrift Yourself, allows him to duplicate the appearance of another person flawlessly and replicate their memories and personality. Due to being able to have Yuha's memories, I'm under the belief that the flashbacks throughout the fight weren't just to enhance the emotional weight of the battle, but as well to serve to show us in hindsight Sternritter Y seeing the memories of Yuha during their battle long ago. With this terrifying revelation with Yuha now showing up, it prompted the question of where the hell has the real Yuha been, and oh boy, his answer made me jump out of my seat. He was meeting with the man below the Squad 1 barracks, the man who sits atop the heavens itself, Sosuke Aizen. I had so many chills watching this detailed addition to the manga of their exact conversation with Yuha attempting to recruit Aizen. Yuha mistakenly thought that they share the same objective within the destruction of Soul Society, but Aizen, as he mentioned to Urahara within his true objective, it's always been to destroy all those which seek to rule over him. Yuha is no different than the Soul King in that regard. Aizen would never be subservient to anyone, and through their dialogue despite Aizen being locked up and unable to move, Aizen seems to be steps ahead of Yuha and spoke with a cadence that implied he was the one in control and not Yuha Bach. It's a terrifying notion that a man can be completely unable to move or seemingly use his abilities, yet he speaks as if he's the victor, the one who will never be ruled over. Aizen time and time again solidifies himself as an S-tier villain, and he outshines Yuha in his own damn arc. Incredible. As this brief cutaway ends, we're brought back once more to the battlefield, and despite us being under the impression Yamamoto's Bankai couldn't be stolen, we are slapped in the face by Yuha telling Yamamoto that his Bankai couldn't be stolen by others, but instead the only one with strength to steal his Bankai was himself, and he takes Yamamoto's Bankai. With Yuha summoning a sword of giant light from the sky, I think we all saw what was coming, as did Yamamoto, because he doesn't run. He doesn't cower. He stands as a champion with an expression of defiance as he split in half with complete silence in the show. This scene mimicked the lack of sound that existed within Ichigo's final Getsuga Tensho. This sound choice made this moment all the more dark and poignant. Yamamoto, the leader of the Gotei 13, the hero of Soul Society, the strongest Shinigami, in the face of the King of Quincy's, he was overwhelmed and wiped out. This cliffhanger is brutal, and it gives us a feeling of utter helplessness for our heroes. In the face of such overwhelming power, who can possibly stand up against the god of Quincy's? This episode was perfection within Bleach and is truly peak. This episode will forever be one ingrained in the very threads of my mind, and I'll long think on Yamamoto's embodiment of what it means to be a leader, both in fighting for the world he's sworn to protect and embracing death with poise and resolve. Yamamoto's stocks are through the roof. If you enjoyed my content, please do consider dropping a subscription. We cover Bleach each and every week, so if you're a fan of Bleach, this is the right place for you. Most importantly, let me know in the comment section below your favorite moment of this episode. My favorite moment of this episode is quite literally from minute 0 until the credits. This has been hiXtrah, and as always, be greedier, and I will catch you all next time.